The night of the gala, the champagne tower still stood untouched, and the two people I trusted most in the world sentenced me to professional death in front of 200 of my colleagues. Evelyn coasted through the entire project. She contributed nothing. Vivian's voice was silk wrapped around a razor blade. Be reasonable. Resign with dignity. Don't make me have HR fire you. My boyfriend Jason delivered the final blow without even looking at me, as if I were a piece of trash he was stepping over on his way to somewhere better. The whispers rose like a tide, every face twisted with contempt, with relief, with a vindictive pleasure that said finally. Not a single person spoke up for me. They had been waiting for this moment. I could feel it. They thought I was just another ordinary employee riding her boyfriend's coattails, no background, no talent, someone who deserved to be thrown out with the trash. What none of them knew was that the project that had tripled the company's valuation, the one that had saved the entire business line and won the industry's top award, every single word of that plan, every top-tier channel and resource, had come from my hands. What none of them knew was that I was the one holding 51% of the company's equity, the hidden investor who had pulled them back from the edge of bankruptcy. I had buried myself in anonymity for 3 years, and in return I got a public execution. Fine. You want dignity. I'll give you a kind of dignity you'll never forget. You want fairness. Let me show you what fairness really looks like. The gala was on a Friday, but the real story began the day before. Thursday afternoon found me at my desk as usual, revising the 17th version of the proposal. My cubicle was in the northeast corner of the open plan office, technically by a window, but that window faced the HVAC units of the neighboring building. In summer it was like sitting next to a jet engine. Vivian had helped me snag this spot 3 months ago, telling me with a warm smile that it was quiet, perfect for someone who liked to focus. I had thanked her, genuinely touched by her thoughtfulness. I learned later that quiet meant invisible. No one walked past this corner. No one cared what the person in this cubicle was doing all day. While I bent over spreadsheets and channel reports, my colleagues gathered in the break room trading gossip. While I stayed late negotiating contracts with vendors in different time zones, they assumed I was streaming shows and killing time. They didn't see. They didn't want to see. That afternoon at 4, I was putting the final polish on the proposal. Every slide had been crafted by my own hands. Every data model had been built through my own sleepless nights. Every channel partnership clause had been negotiated word by word through my own persistence. But the cover page bore Jason's name and Vivian's. I had stopped noticing. That was the worst part. Evelyn. Lucy leaned over from the next cubicle, her voice low. She was a junior hire fresh out of college the year before, the only person in the entire office who still made a point of speaking to me. Did you hear? Tomorrow's gala, Vivian's planning some kind of special announcement. She said there's going to be a major personnel change. Lucy's eyes held a flicker of worry. I shook my head and told her I hadn't heard anything. But I had. Jason had let it slip the night before. He hardly came back to our apartment anymore. 2 months ago he used to be home at least a few nights a week. Now I could count his visits on one hand. Last night he had walked through the door unexpectedly while I was sitting at the dining table, still revising the proposal, the cold blue light of the screen bleaching my face. He stood in the entryway, jacket draped over his forearm, shirt collar open 2 buttons, trailing a faint trace of perfume that was not mine. Evelyn. He didn't change his shoes. He just stood there, his tone like he was processing paperwork. Don't come to the gala tomorrow. Why not? It wouldn't be appropriate. He avoided my eyes, fiddling with his phone. This is a celebration for the core project team. You're not on the core roster. It'll be awkward for everyone. I looked at him. After 3 years, I realized with a jolt that his face had become unfamiliar, not because it had changed, but because I was finally seeing it clearly. Who's on the core team? Me and Vivian. He said the two names lightly, as if trying to minimize the weight of them. We carried this project for 3 months. Planning, channels, the post-mortem, we did it all. You. He paused, recalibrating. You did good work, but it was all support level. The project blew up because of us. Support level. On my laptop screen, the document still open was titled Core Strategy Proposal, Final Version. The creation timestamp read April 7th, 3:42 a.m. I had pulled an all-nighter to finish it. Jason had said, "Let me polish it for you," taken the source file, and send it back the next day with exactly one change. The title had been updated. My name had been replaced with his. Fine. I closed the laptop. I won't go. The relief that washed over his face was so obvious it was almost comical. He walked over, bent down, and brushed a kiss across my forehead, the kind of kiss so light it felt like an afterthought, his lips cool, like the iced Americano he must have been drinking. That's my girl. Once the bonus comes through, I'll take you to the Maldives. We'll make up for everything. He turned and left. The click of the door in the empty apartment was deafening. I sat there, staring at the closed door, and something inside me shifted. Not broke, I had broken a long time ago, in small increments I hadn't let myself acknowledge. Shifted. Like a tectonic plate finally giving way after centuries of pressure. My phone lit up. Vivian had posted on social media. A selfie, background unmistakably Jason's office. She was wearing a blouse in the same style as one of mine, different color, leaning against his chair, flashing a victory sign. The caption read, "Best partner, best you." In the comments, a mutual acquaintance had written, "*You and Jason are way too perfect together. Won't Evelyn get the wrong idea? *" Vivian had replied with a smile emoji and, "*Evelyn's super chill about it. Besides, work partners are supposed to be close*. I turned off my phone and went back to editing the proposal. The words on the screen were calm, the edits precise, efficient. But my fingers were trembling, ever so slightly. I couldn't fool myself. I had loved Jason with everything I had for 3 years. When he said he wanted to start a company, I poured my savings into his dream without a second thought. When he complained about lacking connections in the investment world, I quietly activated every relationship I had to pave his way. When the company was on the brink of collapse, I had injected 12.8 million yuan, nearly $2 million, under the anonymous banner of Starlight Capital, hiding my identity because I knew Jason's pride. If he'd known the money came from me, he would have felt emasculated. I told myself I was giving him room to grow, a stage to shine. I told myself that one day he would look around and see who had been standing behind him all along. But the person he saw was Vivian. And I had become a ghost in my own life. By Friday evening, an hour before the gala was set to begin, I was still at the office. Not to attend. I had come to retrieve a hard drive I'd left in my drawer, the drive containing every original project file, every capital injection record, every channel correspondence log, all the evidence I had accumulated over 3 months. I hadn't originally planned to use it. Keeping records was just a professional habit, the kind of meticulousness my father had drilled into me before he died. But after last night, after sitting in that silent apartment replaying every moment of the past 3 months, I had reconsidered. The pattern was too clear. Jason coming home later and later. Vivian staking her claim more and more brazenly. Colleagues growing colder by the day. Every time I tried to speak in a meeting, I was cut off, talked over, ignored. This wasn't coincidence. This was a coordinated squeeze-out. And they needed to be ready. The office was empty, everyone already at the banquet hall. I pulled open the drawer, slipped the hard drive into my bag, and was about to leave when Marcus walked in. He had been my father's student, years ago, and had served as vice president of this company for 6 years. After my father died, Marcus had quietly kept an eye on me, one of the few who knew the connection between us. To the rest of the company, we were just a senior executive and a junior employee who rarely interacted. Evelyn. He closed the door behind him, his face grim. Don't go to the banquet hall tonight. Why? Vivian was rehearsing this afternoon. His voice dropped. I saw her speech notes. What did they say? He was silent for a few seconds, struggling. Then he exhaled and said it straight. She's going to publicly propose your resignation. On the grounds that you coasted through the entire project and contributed nothing at all. I said nothing. And Jason knows. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper now. He approved it. The air conditioning hummed in the silence between us. Outside the window, the city lights were beginning to flicker on, one by one, a carpet of cold diamonds spreading across the skyline. Marcus. My voice came out steadier than I expected. You kept a full record of my work over the last 3 months, didn't you? All the original files, the version histories, the email logs. Yes. Bring them. What are you going to do? I didn't answer. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. Passing him, I paused. Marcus. After tonight, this company might not be the same. Be ready. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, hard. I've been waiting for this for 3 months. The company had rented out the entire ballroom. A crystal chandelier hung from the 5-meter ceiling, its light shattering into 1,000 pieces across a sea of champagne flutes. A temporary stage dominated the front of the room, backed by a massive LED screen cycling through the glorious achievements of the past 3 months, project metrics, media coverage, client testimonials. Every slide was branded with Jason's name and Vivian's. I arrived half an hour after the event had started. The greeter at the door was an intern from admin who blinked at me in confusion, stammering that she couldn't find my name on the guest list. I walked past her. She didn't try to stop me, maybe something in my expression warned her not to. 20 round tables filled the room, arranged by department and rank. My seat was not at any of them. No one had assigned me a place. Fine. I found a spot in the back right corner of the ballroom, partially concealed by a pillar. From there I could see everything, the stage, the crowd, the faces. Jason stood at the front, immaculate in his tailored suit, the deep blue striped tie I had given him 3 months ago knotted perfectly at his throat. His hair was meticulously styled, his chin lifted at that particular angle of confidence I had never seen on him before. 3 months ago, when he'd taken over this dying company, he couldn't sleep through the night. He'd paced the apartment at 3 in the morning, his hairline visibly receding. Now he looked like a man who had never known a day of doubt in his life. The woman draped on his arm was my best friend, Vivian. She wore a burgundy velvet gown, cut low at the neckline, a diamond pendant glinting at her throat. I recognized that diamond. On my birthday last year, Vivian had given me a similar necklace, and then said, "Oh, Evelyn, it looks so gorgeous on you, let me borrow it for a couple of days." She had never returned it. She leaned into Jason's side, one hand curled around his arm, the other holding a champagne flute, her smile radiant and practiced, a peacock finally unfurling its tail. "Let's raise a glass," someone shouted from a front table. Jack, the sales director, a man whose voice could fill a stadium. To Jason and Vivian. If it weren't for them, this company would be dead and buried by now. A perfect match, another voice joined in. They're like something out of a movie. Laughter and the clinking of glasses swelled into a symphony of celebration. I stood behind the pillar, holding a glass of orange juice no one had offered me, watching. In the 2 hours since I had walked in, not a single person had approached me. Occasionally someone passed by, their eyes skimming over my face, then sliding away quickly, like they had spotted something unsightly, something not quite fit for polite company. "Hey, isn't that Evelyn?" A voice from a nearby table, deliberately lowered but not low enough. Every syllable found my ears. "Jason's girlfriend, what's she doing here?" "I thought she wasn't coming." "Shoo, keep it down." Another voice. "I heard she didn't do a thing on this project." Jason and Vivian carried the whole thing. "Seriously? I see her staying late all the time. Pretending to work. With a director boyfriend covering for her, she can just sit there streaming dramas and no one cares." "Oh my God, that's brutal. But honestly, same. If I had a boyfriend like that, I'd coach too." The laughter stung like needles dragged across skin. To them, my early mornings and late nights were just sitting in front of a screen doing nothing. The 17 versions of the proposal I had sweated over were just surfing the web to kill time. The entire month I'd spent grinding down every channel partner was just dumb luck. The vendors happened to be interested. Why? Because they needed an explanation. An explanation that let them sleep at night. Why a seemingly unremarkable woman had a director boyfriend, a steady job, and a quiet persistence that never seemed to crack. The easiest explanation was, she's riding on a man. She has no real skills. She doesn't deserve any of it, That way, they could feel good about never pushing themselves, never reflecting, never asking why they'd been stuck in the same roles for 3 years without progress. I set my glass down. The sound of glass meeting marble cut through the ambient chatter, sharp and clear. The nearby table fell abruptly silent, heads snapping down toward phones. And then Vivian picked up the microphone. She stood on stage, bathed in golden light that made her skin glow and her features look almost sculpted. She smiled, a warm, practiced, flawless smile, like a lily in full bloom. But I knew where lilies drew their roots. "Everyone, while we're all together, I want to say something." The room quieted. She took a breath, letting her gaze sweep slowly across every face in the audience, and finally it came to rest on one spot. The pillar. My spot. This project's success belongs to every person in this room. But there's one person I especially need to thank. A pause. Let the suspense marinate. Our director, Jason. Applause erupted. Jason dipped his head modestly, a small smile playing at his lips, the picture of humility. Vivian's voice continued, smooth and practiced. "What most of you don't know is that over the last 3 months, Jason shouldered almost the entire project by himself. Planning, channel development, the post-mortem, he practically lived at the office, sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night, just to pull this dying company back from the brink." Her eyes glistened, just enough moisture to look genuine, the perfect amount of quaver in her voice. I could picture her rehearsing this in front of a mirror. Honestly, there were moments I wanted to give up. But seeing Jason work so hard, I told myself I couldn't collapse, because he was my partner, and I couldn't let him carry it alone. Someone in the audience was wiping their eyes. The room had been primed, and everyone was buying it. Then her tone shifted, from sentiment to gravity. But that's exactly why I need to say something a little less pleasant. Her gaze found me again, cutting through the crowd like a blade. There was provocation in those eyes, and triumph, and a kind of malice that had been held underwater too long and was finally surfacing to breathe. There's one person on this project whose behavior was completely unacceptable to the entire team. 200 heads turned in unison toward the pillar. Toward me. The sensation was like being stripped naked under a spotlight. Evelyn. Vivian's voice was soft and lethal. As a member of the project team, you produced nothing of value the entire time. You didn't contribute to planning. You didn't bring in any channels. You didn't do any of the post-mortem work. But every time credit was handed out, you were there to collect your share. She shook her head, the picture of pained disappointment. I know you're Jason's girlfriend. That status gives you certain advantages in this company. And I've always tried to protect you, to speak up for you, to smooth things over. But this time, I can't cover for you anymore. Because it's not fair to everyone else who poured their heart into this project. She drew a breath, like a judge about to deliver a verdict. So for the sake of team fairness, and the company's future, I propose, Evelyn resigns. Tonight. Voluntarily. Silence. Then uproar. Oh my God, she actually said it. About time. Someone who sits around doing nothing deserves to be kicked out. I heard she comes from a totally ordinary family. No money, no connections. She was probably hoping to leech off her director boyfriend for a few more years. Jason must have been blind to end up with someone like that. The whispers swelled into a wave, crashing over me from all sides. No one was surprised by the absurdity of the accusation. No one questioned whether Vivian's words had any basis in reality. They were simply thrilled that someone had finally voiced what everyone wanted to say but didn't dare. Henry Watson, the HR manager, a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses who usually greeted me with a respectful "Miss Winters," moved with startling efficiency. He pulled a resignation form from his briefcase, wove through 2 tables, and placed it in front of me, pen cap already removed. "Miss Winters, just sign here." His tone was as casual as processing a package delivery. "A clean break. The company will compensate you with 3 months severance, standard process." The paper lay before me. Black ink on white paper, the header printed with the company personnel policy clause I myself had reviewed and approved 3 months ago. I looked at it. I didn't move. Vivian descended from the stage. The click of her stiletto heels against the marble floor echoed through the hush, asterisk tap, tap, tap asterisk, like a drumbeat of judgment. The crowd parted for her automatically. She walked through that opening and came to a stop directly in front of me. She stood several inches taller than me, not naturally, but on 12-centimeter heels. She leaned down slightly, bringing her face level with mine. The gesture was intimate, almost kind. It was also a power move. "Evelyn." Her voice was pitched just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Warm. Concerned. The voice of a kind senior mentoring a hopeless junior. "Admitting you're mediocre is hard. I get it. I've doubted myself before too. But some people are simply on a different level, and that's not your fault." She placed 2 fingers on my shoulder. The touch was feather-light, almost gentle, and freezing cold. "You have no ability, no network, no family background. None of that is your fault. But taking up a position you don't do the work for and letting the team pay the price, that's where you've gone wrong. She sighed, and her eyes filled with what looked like genuine regret. Be sensible. Step aside. Once Jason and I are established, we can still help you find an ordinary job. She patted my shoulder lightly, consolingly, like placating a difficult child. The room was utterly still. Everyone was waiting for my reaction. Waiting for me to cry, to break down, to scream at Jason for betraying me, to grab Vivian's arm and beg her, for the sake of our years of friendship, to stop. Or, and this was clearly the most anticipated outcome, to watch me pick up the pen with trembling fingers, sign the resignation form, and flee the ballroom in tears, giving them all a perfect, delicious story to laugh about over drinks. Phones were raised. I saw recording indicators glowing red, scattered through the crowd like animal eyes in the dark. I didn't cry. I raised my eyes toward the stage. Jason stood there, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. He hadn't spoken a single word since the ambush began. He just stood there, watching me be cornered, humiliated, driven to the edge, as if it were a performance that had nothing to do with him. But when our eyes met, he finally spoke. His voice was calm. So calm it was cruel. Evelyn. My name, in his mouth, sounded like a stranger's word. Don't make a scene. Resign voluntarily, and it can end with some dignity. Don't force me to have HR terminate you. Asterisk, don't make a scene. Dignity. Terminate you, asterisk. 7 words. 3 years of my life, and all they were worth was 7 words. I picked up the resignation form. Looked at it for 2 seconds. The clauses were dense, the signature line at the bottom blank, waiting for me to fill in my name and make it all final. They win. I leave. A dignified exit. I placed the form back on the table. And then I laughed. Softly. Fine. I'll go. The relief that rippled through the room was immediate, almost audible. Vivian's lips curled, the satisfaction barely contained, a flash of ecstasy in her eyes that was almost feral. Jason exhaled, his shoulders dropping, the tension melting from his frame like he'd just shed 100-pound weight. Henry pushed the pen forward again, practically pressing it into my fingers. I didn't take it. I lifted my head, my gaze moving from Vivian's face, to Jason's, and finally across the entire room. My voice wasn't loud. But every syllable was distinct, carrying to the furthest corners of the ballroom. But when I go, I will withdraw my entire investment, cut off all resources, and permanently blacklist this company. Silence. Absolute silence. The kind of silence where even breathing stops. 2 seconds passed. Then, pfft. Someone burst out laughing. It was Jack, the sales director with the stadium voice. He was doubled over, pointing at me, gasping to the person next to him. Did she just say, withdraw investment? Oh my God, is she drunk? Who gave her a drink? Her tolerance is terrible. The laughter spread like a virus. People slapped tables, clutched their stomachs, wiped tears from their eyes. A wine glass tipped over, red soaking into the white tablecloth like a bloom of blood. Starlight Capital. Does she even know what Starlight Capital is? I heard the person behind Starlight Capital is so reclusive even Forbes couldn't get an interview. And this girl thinks she can pretend to be them. I'm dying. Do you think she reads too many of those trashy revenge novels? I'll destroy your whole company, ha. Guys, stop laughing. What if she really is rich? No wait, I'm sorry. I can't even say that with a straight face. Vivian laughed the hardest. She was holding on to the edge of a table for support, her whole upper body shaking, laughter spilling out of her polished throat in shrill little bursts. "Evelyn, you're honestly..." She wiped at her eyes, still giggling, and turned toward Jason. "Darling, is your girlfriend always this entertaining at home?" "Darling." In front of the entire company. In front of me. Jason's face tightened. He strode down from the stage, footsteps pounding the floor, and seized my wrist. His grip was brutal, fingers digging into the bones of my wrist, grinding hard enough to bruise. "Evelyn, stop making a fool of yourself." He forced the words through clenched teeth, his voice low. The irritation in it, the embarrassment, it wasn't concern for me being attacked. It was shame that my hysterics were embarrassing him. "This isn't the place for your drama. Sign the paper now, and I can still preserve some dignity for you. If you keep this up." He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear, dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "It won't be pretty for anyone." I could smell his cologne. Not mine. It was Joe Malone, Vivian's signature scent. Mixed with his own smell, thick and nauseating. Vivian took it all in from the side. She glided over and slipped her hand around Jason's other arm, her body pressing against him with an ease that spoke of long practice. Her eyes met mine, and there was no attempt to hide the triumph anymore, the naked glee of the mistress who has finally pushed the wife off the cliff. "Evelyn, sweetheart." Her voice was cloying, dripping with honey. "Ambition without ability is just delusion. Jason's been carrying you for years. You should be grateful. A clean break now is the best thing for everyone. Go home, find an ordinary job, live an ordinary life. That's its own kind of happiness, you know." Her smile was gentle. Polished. Impeccable. Like a mask. I didn't look at her. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and opened a file. Then I cast it to the screen. The giant LED display, which had been cycling through images of Jason and Vivian's so-called triumphs, all their names, their photos, their beaming faces, flickered. Went black. And then lines of information began to appear. White text on a black background, the font large enough that the people in the very last row could read every punctuation mark. Starlight Capital, sole natural person account. Investment target, Orion Media Group. Total capital injected, $1,792,000. Equity stake, 51%, absolute controlling interest. Full project resource ownership, Evelyn Winters. Below that, my name. My identification number. Bank records for every single capital injection, timestamps, transaction paths, electronic seals from the bank, irrefutable. The first wire, $500,000, a Thursday afternoon 3 months ago, deposited into the company account with the note, capital injection. The second, $300,000. The third, $280,000. Each one documented. Each one undeniable. Then came the emails. Screenshots of correspondence, hundreds of them, sent from my private email address, received by key decision-makers at every major platform. From initial outreach to contract negotiation to execution details, every message composed by me, every deal framework built by me. And at the bottom of every single email, the same closing line: for follow-up, please contact our project leads, Mr. Jason Grant and Ms. Vivian Shaw. The channel partnerships that Jason and Vivian claimed they had secured on their own had all been handed to them on a silver platter, negotiated, structured, and pre-closed by me behind the scenes. Then the document histories. Cloud-stored editing logs clearly showing, original creator, Evelyn Winters. Last modified by, Evelyn Winters. Jason's version. He had taken my source file, changed the title, replaced my name with his, and uploaded it at 10:12 a.m. on April 8, a full 30 hours after I had created the original. And then, finally, the screen displayed a surveillance recording. It was footage from the company parking garage, time-stamped 2 weeks ago, a Saturday, 2 a.m. A black Mercedes parked in a corner spot, Jason's license plate. The driver's door opened, and Jason stepped out, looking around carefully. After confirming he was alone, he opened the passenger door. Vivian slipped out, wrapped in a shawl. Under the dim garage lights, they fell into each other's arms and kissed, a kiss that went on for nearly 2 minutes. The timestamp in the corner of the footage ticked on, second by second, millisecond by millisecond, undeniable. Every sound in that ballroom was severed by an invisible blade. Not a gradual hush, not the kind of quiet that falls when someone says shoo and people settle down. This was a switch being flipped. 200 people, frozen mid-motion. A wine glass hovered in the air, red wine sliding down the stem and dripping onto the tablecloth, spreading in a dark stain like blood. Mouths hung open, smiles still half-formed, the expressions on those faces grotesque and absurd. Phones were still raised, recording indicators still blinking red, but the hands holding them had started to tremble. Jack, the sales director, his laughter frozen on his face. His lips were still stretched in a grin, but the mirth had drained from his eyes, replaced by a dawning, gut-clenching terror. Every joke he had just made was now a sword hanging over his own neck. Vivian was the last to react. Not because she was calm. Because her brain had simply stopped working. Her smile was still there, muscle memory kept the corners of her mouth lifted, but the light in her eyes was dying, like a candle being snuffed out. The smile crumbled from the edges inward, collapsing in slow motion, and her face turned from flushed confidence to paper white in less than 3 seconds. That's impossible. Her voice had lost all its polish and sweetness, turning shrill and fractured, like a punctured balloon. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. How could you be? You're lying. It's fabricated. She lunged toward the screen, clawing at the air as if she could physically tear the images down. But the LED display was embedded in the wall, high and cold, staring down at her. She jumped, missed, her heel twisted, and she collapsed onto the floor in a heap of burgundy velvet, the skirt spreading around her like a deflated bubble. It's not possible. She kept repeating it, her voice shrinking, as if trying to convince herself. You're just an ordinary office worker. Your family's so average. You don't even buy nice bags. How can you be? You can't be. Her voice faded, because she was starting to realize she didn't believe her own words anymore. Jason's grip on my wrist loosened. Not on purpose. It just slipped. His fingers went slack, sliding off my skin, hanging in the air, trembling. He looked at my phone screen, then at the LED display, then back at my phone. 3 times. With each pass, more color drained from his face. His pupils were quaking, like a water surface in an earthquake, unable to hold a steady reflection. No, it can't be. His voice shook so badly the words barely held together. How are you, your starlight? He couldn't finish. Because he had reached the surveillance footage. The car. The 2 figures. The kiss that lasted nearly 2 minutes. The timestamp, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, what had he told me? Oh, right, he was at the office late, an urgent project, don't wait up. 2 in the morning. Parking garage. With Vivian. His mouth opened. Closed. Nothing came out but strangled sounds. It was a particular look, not the panic of someone wrongly accused, but the naked terror of someone who knows every lie has just been stripped away. He wanted to explain, but he knew that in this room, in front of this screen, any words would be laughable. Marcus stepped out from the edge of the crowd. He was holding a thick folder. He walked to the center of the room, cleared his throat, and his voice rang out steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have a complete set of original records. Please, take a look." He opened the folder and laid out the documents, one by one, on the main table. They spread like a hand of cards, and every card was a secret that would shatter everything this room thought it knew about Jason and Vivian. April 7th. Original core strategy proposal. Creator, Evelyn Winters. The final version submitted to the client under Jason's name shows a 93% content match with Evelyn's draft. The only changes, the title, the byline, and 3 punctuation adjustments. April 15th through May 3rd. 17 channel partnership emails, all independently handled by Evelyn's private email. In each case, after completing all preliminary negotiations and term agreements, Evelyn directed the partners to Jason and Vivian for final signing. The evidence chain is complete. The channel contacts can verify at any time. Mid-May. Project Postmortem Database. Original creator, Evelyn Winters. The PowerPoint Vivian presented at the executive meeting used 15 pages of Evelyn's core data analysis, with the byline replaced with her own. With each line, someone in the room sucked in a breath. May 20th. Executive meeting. Jason reported that he and Vivian had independently secured 3 major East Coast channel partners. Email records show that initial cooperation agreements with all 3 partners have been negotiated and pre-confirmed by Evelyn a full month earlier. June. Enough. Jason's voice tore through the room, raw and ragged, veins bulging in his neck. He spun toward me, and his eyes, in an instant, went red, not with guilt, but with the desperate, thrashing panic of a man watching everything he's built catch fire. He lunged forward and grabbed both my arms, his fingers digging in, the heat of his palms burning through my sleeves, trembling. "Evelyn, listen to me." His voice plunged from a roar to a plea in the space of a single breath, the arc of a man's fall from arrogance to groveling measured in seconds. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was blinded, a moment of weakness. It was Vivian who seduced me. She kept saying you weren't good enough for me, she." "What did you just say?" Vivian shrieked, scrambling up from the floor. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared. The face that had been so carefully polished was now twisted beyond recognition. She stumbled forward and grabbed Jason's sleeve, her voice a jagged shriek. "You told me Evelyn was boring. Frigid. Not on your level. You came after me. You said being with her was like drinking lukewarm water, no flavor, no excitement. Those were your exact words. Did you say those things or not? Shut your mouth." Jason whirled on her, spittle flying. "You want me to shut up?" Vivian laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "Jason, you flip faster than a pancake. The last 2 weeks you've been staying at my place. Did you tell me to shut up then? When you said all we had to do was push Evelyn out and I'd be the director's wife, did you tell me to shut up then?" Phones rose higher. Every word of this exchange was being recorded. Tonight, no, within the hour, it would be everywhere. I watched them tear each other apart. The man I had loved for 3 years. The woman I had trusted as my closest friend for 6. Now they were 2 animals trapped in a cage, clawing at each other's flesh, trying to wash themselves clean in the other's blood. Ridiculous. So ridiculous it was almost funny. Jason shook off Vivian and turned back to me. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice softening into something close to a whimper, the voice of a man trying to soothe a tantrum-throwing child, a voice he had never used with me before, because I had always been too independent to need soothing. "Evelyn, please. Can you find it in your heart to forgive me? 3 years. We've been together 3 years. I do have real feelings for you. I do. I just made the kind of mistake every man makes. No, wait, I'm not trying to make excuses. What I mean is, you're the one I love. She was just a mistake, a meaningless. A meaningless what?" I finally spoke. My voice was soft, but every person in that room heard it. "A meaningless mistake you've been sleeping with for 2 months. A meaningless mistake you planned to install in my place the second you got rid of me. A meaningless mistake you stood on stage tonight and silently endorsed while she demanded my resignation in front of everyone." His mouth opened and closed. Nothing came out. "Jason." I looked into his eyes. "When you were telling me you loved me, did you think about the fact that I was up last night, still polishing the details of your proposal? When you were kissing Vivian in that parking garage, did it cross your mind that I was alone in our apartment, building the data tables for your next morning's meeting?" I pocketed my phone and pulled out the hard drive. 3 years. Every achievement you've ever been proud of was a brick I laid beneath your feet. You thought your own brilliance saved the company, but the truth is, you were stepping on my heart and convincing yourself you were flying. Every time you threw a celebration, every time you stood on stage accepting awards, every time you basked in the admiration of your peers, you never once stopped to ask yourself a question. Why you? What did you actually do to deserve any of it? His face was ash. Your director's office was renovated with the investment I brought in. Your project pipeline was built on connections I spent years cultivating. Those top-tier partners you bragged about, I mapped out the strategy, scheduled the meetings, paved every inch of the road before you ever set foot on it. I thought you just needed time to grow. Room to learn. A stage to stand on. So I hid myself in the shadows to give you that space, that dignity. I thought the more I stepped back, the clearer you'd see what really mattered. I thought if I gave you everything I had, you would learn to treasure it. You didn't. You started believing you deserved it. I watched the last glimmer of light drain from his eyes, those eyes I had once found so captivating, so full of promise. Now they were just hollow. Then I turned to Vivian. She had stopped shrieking. Now she was just fear in a red dress, hollowed out, her lips trembling with words she didn't dare speak. Vivian. I said her name evenly. Earlier, you told me that some people are simply on a different level. You were right about that. But you got the order wrong. The gap between us was never that you were above me. It was that what you thought was my ceiling, was actually my floor. The last trace of color drained from her face. She stood there like a statue, so still I wasn't sure she was still breathing. I turned toward the executives huddled in the corner. Those same people who swaggered through the office every day, throwing their weight around, now they were shrinking against the wall, faces pale, foreheads glazed with cold sweat. The CFO was wringing a handkerchief that was already soaked through. The VP of Operations' lips were trembling, desperate to speak, too terrified to try. In the far corner, the partner representatives were exchanging shell-shocked glances. Edward Wilson, our largest partner, slowly rose to his feet. He had been in this industry for 20 years, weathered every kind of storm. But the look on his face now was something I had never seen before, a complex mixture of shock, chagrin, and something close to awe. He looked at me as though seeing me for the very first time. Ms. Winters. His voice was hoarse. We've worked together for 3 years. Every critical juncture, you were the one on the other end of the line. I owe you an apology. We all do. We never knew. He inclined his head in a small bow, and his tone was heavy with sincerity. Whatever you decide to do next, we'll follow you. The words hit the room like a boulder dropping into still water. One by one, the other partners stood. Their voices overlapped, but the message was identical. Their loyalty was to Evelyn Winters, not to Orion Media Group. The executives' faces went several shades whiter. I swept my eyes across the room. When I spoke, my voice was unhurried, measured, as if reading from an ordinary board resolution. Effective immediately, the following decisions are now in effect. The room held its breath. First, Jason Grant. Embezzlement of company assets, theft of intellectual property, fraud against shareholders, abuse of position for personal gain. Terminated, effective immediately. Legal proceedings will commence to recover all salary and bonuses obtained through falsified performance over the past 3 months. A formal notice will be filed with all major industry associations, recruitment platforms, and executive search firms. Permanent blacklist. Any enterprise that employs this individual or conducts business with him will be deemed in breach of contract by Starlight Capital. Jason stumbled backward, his knee slamming into a table leg with a sickening thud. He didn't sit down. He just sagged against the table, his entire frame swaying, a puppet whose strings had been cut. Second, Vivian Shaw. Workplace harassment, malicious defamation of a colleague, systematic theft of intellectual labor, falsification of work records. Terminated, effective immediately. All illicit gains to be recovered. Permanent industry blacklist, same terms as the above. Vivian didn't move. She stood frozen, a picture halted mid-frame. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, streaking through the ruined makeup in dark trails. She made no sound, because she knew that in this room, not a single person had any pity left for her tears. Third, Orion Media Group. Full capital withdrawal. Starlight Capital's investment of $1.79 million will be fully recalled, along with all channel resources, traffic portals, media networks, and client connections deployed over the past 3 months, severed immediately. As of this moment, this company no longer enjoys any endorsement from Starlight Capital. The CFO's legs gave out. He slid to the floor, hands clutching his head, fingers twisted into his hair, mouthing frantic calculations. What would happen when the banks opened tomorrow? Fourth. I paused. Everyone in this room. Every person froze. Every word you said tonight. Every laugh. Every phone you raised to record my humiliation. I remember it all. Effective immediately, Starlight Capital and all enterprises under my name will permanently close all cooperation channels with every individual present, with the exception of Marcus Ford and our partner representatives. Recruitment referrals, industry background checks, business dealings, every single one of you. Rejected. On site. Silence. Someone grabbed the edge of a table to stay upright. Someone's face turned the color of old milk. Someone set down their wine glass very carefully, as if it had suddenly become radioactive. Jack's legs were visibly shaking. He tried to produce a smile. He was a man who had solved every problem in his life with a grin, but his facial muscles weren't cooperating. His lips twitched twice and gave up. No one spoke. No one dared. I turned and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted like water before a blade. My heels echoed on the marble floor, steady, unhurried. Behind me, the silence shattered. Vivian lunged forward, one heel snapping, and she kicked off the other shoe and ran barefoot, her ruined gown dragging on the floor. "Evelyn, please, 6 years, you can't." Her voice chased me down the corridor, shrill and broken, the sound of someone drowning and reaching for a rope that was already gone. But this time, no one followed. No one dared. The gala ended without a shred of dignity for anyone. After I left, the ballroom descended into chaos. Someone later posted an account on an industry forum titled, "I watched a billion-dollar company die before the champagne was even poured." The partners were the first to leave. Edward Wilson, on his way out, stopped at the pillar where I had stood and bowed slightly. Marcus told me this later. Then he straightened, said something to the person next to him, 20 years in this business, and I've never been so blind. And walked out without looking back. Then came the vendors and channel partners. One of them, a big, plain-spoken technical supplier from Chicago, paused next to Jason on his way out. He looked down at the man still sagging against the table, let out a grunt, and said, "Waste of a perfectly good toast earlier." Then he was gone, his team scrambling after him. The executive's breakdown came next. The CFO was still on the floor, head in his hands, muttering a litany of disaster. "The bank gave us a $2 million credit line based on Starlight's endorsement. The moment they pull it, the accounts freeze tomorrow. Payroll, vendor debts, the office lease, it's all gone. It's all gone." No one was listening. Everyone else was drowning in the same flood. The VP of operations was frantically dialing every investor who might still take his call. He dialed a dozen numbers. A dozen calls went to voicemail or were hung up. The one person who finally answered listened for 3 seconds, said, "You brought this on yourselves," and hung up. He stood in the middle of the room clutching his phone like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't ground at all. Henry Watson, the HR manager, quietly crumpled the resignation form and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He looked around at the wreckage of the company he'd served for 5 years, exhaled a long breath, and walked out without a word. He didn't try to plead with anyone, not because he had dignity left, but because he knew it was pointless. He had been so quick to offer me that pen. Now he was just as quick to disappear. As for Jason and Vivian, they were each cornered by their own mob. The crowd around Jason was made of the same people who had toasted him an hour earlier. Jack was at the front, his face purple, spittle flying. "Director Grant, no, Jason, you screwed all of us. You told us Evelyn was just some ordinary employee. You said you did all the work. You said Starlight Capital was impressed by your business plan. Was there a single true word out of your mouth?" Jason stood against the table, tie askew, hair disheveled, eyes vacant. He opened his mouth, but every attempt at speech was drowned by more fury. "We all backed you up. We all followed your lead and mocked Evelyn. And now what? Industry-wide blacklist. Blacklist. What are we supposed to do? You owe us our careers." The crowd around Vivian was different. The women in the company, the ones who had shared afternoon tea with her, gossiped about me, traded likes on social media. Their faces had morphed from shock to fury to raw, burning resentment. "Vivian, you told us Evelyn was a parasite. That she had no skills. That Jason was the only thing keeping her afloat. You lied to us. You lied to all of us, and you used us as weapons. You stole her boyfriend, you stole her work, and you made us all your accomplices. What are you crying for? You don't have the right to cry. Every single one of us, tonight, our careers ended because of you." Vivian was on the floor, arms wrapped around herself, face buried in her knees, sobbing so hard her whole body convulsed. Her red dress pooled around her, stained with dirt and spilled wine, like a flower someone had trampled. No one helped her up. No one pitied her. Every gaze on her said the same thing: you deserve this. But deeper than the anger was a colder, quieter terror. The ones who had whispered, "No wonder she slacks off all day." The ones who had laughed, "Must be nice having a director boyfriend covering for you." The ones who had held up their phones, waiting to capture my humiliated exit, they were all remembering, now, what they had said, what they had done, what they had recorded. And then they remembered my last words before I walked out. I remember it all. Not a threat. A statement. Like a judge reading a verdict. They had laughed for so long. Now it was their turn to weep. Marcus was the last to leave the ballroom. He stood alone in the middle of the wreckage, shattered glasses, crumpled name cards, a single abandoned high heel. The chandelier still blazed overhead, as radiant as ever, but it illuminated nothing but ruin. He took out his phone and sent me a message. "Evelyn, I'm in the garage. There's something you deserve to know." The parking garage was quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies the distant hum of elevator machinery and the echo of your own footsteps. Marcus was leaning against a pillar, an unlit cigarette between his fingers. When he saw me coming, he tucked it back into his pocket and took a deep breath. "When your father invested in the original Orion startup, he told me something." He paused, reaching back through the years. He said, "Marcus, the thing I regret most isn't the shareholders I let down or the deals I lost. It's my daughter. She lost her mother when she was little, and I was always on the road. She used to fall asleep holding the phone, waiting for me to call." Something seized in my chest. My father had been dead for 10 years. The car accident that took him had also taken the version of me that believed the world was safe. So what did he do? My voice came out rougher than I intended. "He left you one of the small startups he'd just invested in. Designated you as the sole inheritor, but with a stipulation: you couldn't exercise controlling rights until you turned 25. Marcus looked at me. "That company was the predecessor of Orion Media Group." I went still. He said, "Let it grow on its own for a few years. If you wanted to take it over when the time came, it would be yours. If not, you could sell it. Either way," he said, "it was your dowry." My fingers tightened on the strap of my bag. "When you injected capital anonymously 3 years ago, I knew it was you. The name Starlight Capital, your father came up with that on a whim, years ago. There are maybe 5 people alive who know that. But I didn't say anything. You were hiding for a reason, and I assumed it was your way of carrying on his legacy." Marcus's voice dropped. "I didn't realize you were doing it for Jason." Silence spread through the dim garage. After a long moment, I asked quietly, "Did he know?" "Jason? No. How could he? When he joined the company, it had already evolved from the little startup your father funded. The original records, I'm the only one with copies. He genuinely believed he built Orion from the ground up." Marcus pulled the cigarette out again, turned it over in his fingers, still didn't light it. "Evelyn, the biggest mistake you made over the last 3 years wasn't trusting the wrong man. It was tolerating too much. You tolerated so much that everyone started thinking you were easy to push around. Tolerating you became a habit. Abusing you became normal." He pocketed the cigarette and met my eyes. "But tonight, you finally stopped." I was silent for a long time. Then I nodded. "Marcus, I'm starting over. This time, under my own name." He smiled. "I've been waiting 10 years to hear you say that." In the 72 hours following the withdrawal, the collapse of Orion Media Group unfolded like a chain of dominoes, each fall triggering the next, precise and merciless. Day 1, 7 active projects received notices of termination from their partners, all with the same phrasing. Given that your core resource provider has withdrawn, this project no longer meets the conditions to proceed. Not a single partner hesitated. Not a single one needed to discuss it further. The reason was simple: the decision makers at those partner companies had already messaged me the night of the gala. Long or short, the message was the same: Ms. Winters, our loyalty is to you. Day 2, the banks froze the company accounts. Without Starlight Capital's credit endorsement, every line of credit reset to zero. The CFO, drenched in sweat, marched into the bank and was politely marched back out. The company's liquid funds couldn't even cover the office rent for the end of the month. Day 3, the stock price collapsed. Investors demanded mass divestment. The group chats lit up with curses and recriminations. Some were furious at Jason for deceiving them. Some were furious at management for being blind. And some were privately furious at themselves for never once asking the question, who is really holding this company up? The company that had been the toast of the industry 3 days earlier became a cautionary case study, its downfall packaged into PowerPoint decks for startup boot camps. Today, class, we're going to learn how not to alienate your investors to the point where they obliterate your entire company. Jason's blacklist notice was posted on every major industry association website. The wording was damning, the evidence incontrovertible. Headhunters took one look and shook their heads. This Mr. Grant, one of them was overheard saying, might want to consider a career change. To rebuild, he would need to enter an industry where no one knew his name. But starting from zero, in his mid-30s, with a formal industry-wide black mark, who would give him the chance? He reached out to me from a new number, not the previous 3, all of which I'd blocked. Someone else's phone, probably. The message was long and incoherent. It started with furious indignation. Evelyn, how could you do this to me? Then slid into groveling. Evelyn, I know I was wrong, please, can you just give me one chance? And ended with bitter accusation. If you were this rich, why didn't you just tell me from the start? I didn't respond. I blocked the 4th number. Not out of hatred. Hatred still requires emotional energy, and my account with him had been overdrawn to zero, permanently cancelled, no balance left for any further transactions. Vivian's situation was worse. I wasn't the only person she had ever done this to. Once the public notice went out, it was like opening a door that had been bolted shut for years. People she had wronged in the past started coming forward, one after another. Former co-workers revealed that she had used the exact same method to push out 2 senior strategists at her previous company, stealing their proposals, claiming the work as her own, and branding them as incompetent on their way out the door. Those 2 strategists, saddled with a ruined reputation, had struggled for months to find new jobs. Someone posted in an industry group, *Vivian Shaw, do you remember me? You stole my proposal, told the boss it was all your original idea, and had me thrown out. I've been waiting 2 years for this day, *. Then a former college roommate surfaced with a story about how Vivian's senior thesis had plagiarized the core argument of another student in the cohort, a student who had been unable to prove it at the time and had swallowed the injustice and graduated in silence. One revelation after another, peeling away the layers of the persona she had so carefully constructed over the years. The outermost layer, the gracious, polished professional. The next, the warm, supportive best friend. The next, the hardworking, reliable team player. But peeled all the way down, there was nothing inside. Just a hollow shell, and a heart that had never had room for anyone but itself. She sent word through a mutual friend. She wanted to apologize in person. She couldn't leave her apartment. She couldn't look at her phone. She was having nightmares every night. She knew she had done wrong and wanted to return all the bonuses she had stolen. I told the friend 4 words: I don't need to see her. The friend hesitated. Are you not going to forgive her? Forgiveness requires genuine remorse, I said. Every tear she shed has been for herself, not guilt over hurting me, but rage that she didn't anticipate the counterstrike. Tell me honestly, if that screen tonight had shown a different story, if I really had been nobody, do you think she would have hesitated for even 1 second before stomping me into the ground? The friend had no answer. This wasn't hardness. This was clarity. Some harm is forgivable. Some malice isn't. Withholding forgiveness from someone like Vivian isn't holding a grudge, it's holding a boundary. Letting go of her didn't require absolving her. It just required releasing her from occupying any further square inch of my life. That was the greatest mercy I could offer, and it was entirely for myself. 2 weeks after the withdrawal, Twilight Media officially launched. The name was my own. Twilight, the last light of evening, spreading across a vast and open sky. Not harsh enough to blind, but bright enough to see by. Not loud, but unmistakable. No more building pedestals for other people to stand on. My light would illuminate me, and only me. The office was on a higher floor than Orion had been, with a wider view. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out across the entire downtown skyline, and on clear days you could see the hills in the distance turning gold in the sunset. On opening day, I held no ceremony. No press. No social media announcement. I just stood at the window for a while, watching the traffic flow through the streets below, made myself a cup of coffee, and got to work. The first call came from Edward Wilson. Ms. Winters. Congratulations on the new venture. His voice carried a genuine smile. As promised, our contract is drafted. I'm sending it over today. The terms are better this time. No more intermediaries. We sign directly with you. Then the second call. The third. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, Twilight Media's signed partner count had already reached half of what Orion had boasted at its peak. And every agreement was direct, with Evelyn Winters. No middlemen. No blurred lines. No name hidden in the shadows. At 6, Marcus walked in with a stack of files, and behind him was a person I recognized. Lucy. The junior hire from last year, the one at the gala who hadn't joined the laughter but hadn't had the courage to stand up either. She stood in the doorway, both hands clutching the strap of her bag, knuckles white. She couldn't meet my eyes. She stared at the tips of her shoes, her lips moving several times before she managed to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Winters. I submitted an interview application. Marcus said you were here today and told me to come. Her eyes were rimmed red, like she had been holding back tears for a long time. I didn't stand up that night. Her voice trembled. I was scared. When everyone else laughed, I didn't dare not laugh. When everyone decided you should leave, I didn't dare disagree. I know that's not an excuse. I was a coward. I don't deserve to work for you. But... She drew a shaky breath, lifted her head, and the tears finally spilled over. But if you'll give me a chance, I want to become the kind of person who, the next time a storm comes, does stand up. Someone who doesn't hide. I looked at this girl, 5 or 6 years younger than me. I remembered the cup of coffee she placed on my desk every morning, for 3 months, never missing a day. She knew I didn't take sugar, always ordered an Americano, always made sure it was hot but not scalding. She had never once mentioned it, and I had never once thanked her. Lucy. Yes. Report on Monday. 3-month probation. Same terms as everyone else. No special treatment. She blinked, uncomprehending for a moment. Then she bent into a bow so deep she nearly toppled over. Marcus caught her by the arm. Thank you, Ms. Winters. Thank you. I'll work so hard, I swear I'll work so hard. She was crying and laughing at the same time, tears and snot smeared across her face, utterly ungraceful. But her eyes were blazing. I turned back toward the window. Outside, the sun was sinking into the horizon, painting the entire skyline in gold and rose. The light wasn't blinding like midday, nor dark like midnight. It was soft, steady, saturated, more vivid than any other hour of the day. Twilight. The sky was about to go dark. But after the dark, the light would come. For 3 years I had hidden my light to illuminate others. What I got in return was betrayal, contempt, and a celebration where I was told to resign with dignity. But from today, from this moment, my light would shine for me. And for those who, trembling in the storm, still carried a stubborn spark they refused to let die. There was a knock at the door. Marcus leaned in, holding a thick stack of resumes. Ms. Winters, the candidate files for next week are ready. 37 total, 6 of them former Orion staff. I've flagged them all for your review. I took the stack and flipped to the first page. In the corner was a photo of a young woman, her eyes clear and steady. In the self-description field, she had written, "Looking for a team worth giving everything to." "Let's go," I said, picking up my pen and standing, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Interviews start now." Outside the window, twilight was settling over the city. At the boundary between light and dark, the whole world was bathed in a deep, warm gold. This was the hour of the setting sun. But it wasn't an ending. It was a prologue.